discussion is called a strong base, the European Chips Act and building homegrown European semiconductor capacity. And our panel comprises, our hybrid panel, Eva Kayi, member of the European Parliament, Vice President of the European Parliament, a member of the ITRE committee, who's joining us from somewhere outside Brussels. Maybe she will tell us where. Colette Maloney, who's head of Unit A3, Microelectronics and Photonics Industry, DG Connect at the European Commission. Welcome, Colette. Is Eva with us? Maybe, okay. Lars Reger, Chief Technology Officer and Executive Vice President of NXP Netherlands. Hi, Lars. Ilias Chantos, Global Privacy Officer, Head of EMA Government Affairs at Broadcom. Welcome, Ilias. And last but not least, Riccardo Masucci, Director of Security and Technology Policy of Intel Corporation. Thank you all for being here. According to my program, Eva is going to make the opening remarks. Can you reassure me that she's on and available to make these remarks? Eva, are you with us? If not, we will move swiftly on to the next speaker. No? There's somebody making a very strange sign at me at the back of the room. I'm not quite sure what that means. Unless I hear to the contrary, I will simply invite Colette to take the first slot. If you don't mind, Colette, while waiting from a signal from somebody that Eva's with us. Is that okay, Colette, if I move on straight on to you and invite you to make some opening remarks?
Yes, that's fine, actually. Thank you, Paul. So I was going to say basically say some remarks about the CHIPS Act, to run through it briefly. So I'll do that. So the Commission has basically, it has set ambitious objectives. Our 20% target for 2030 has come up. I want to emphasize that the CHIPS Act does go broader than the 20% by 2030 target. The CHIPS Act is basically about ensuring that Europe will be equipped to meet the goals of the digital and green transitions, including also our ambitions on AI, and to weather crisis situations better. And for that, we need a more resilient ecosystem in general, not just the capability to manufacture more. I wanted to stress that. With the proposed CHIPS Act, we're not very different to other regions and countries in recognizing the crucial role of semiconductors. But we are all starting from different baselines, and there are different means which we can deploy to achieve the ambitions that we've set. And at the same time in Europe, we recognize that both the technology itself and the value chain that are highly complex, and whatever we do, we cannot do in isolation. In terms of the baseline, so we all know Europe accounts for no more than 10% of global production today. We do have certain strengths, including a very strong R&D base. We also lead in the production of certain types of manufacturing equipment, notably for lithography and in the development of chips for certain vertical industries. I mention automotive. I mention automation as well in factories, for example. And here we excel in the design and in the production also of MEMS chips, microcontrollers, power chips, and in implementing features like security, reliability, and energy performance. But we do have gaps, and they include dependencies on design tools and design IP. And in advanced digital design, I would say production and packaging. And these gaps, for us, these gaps are worrying in a world where data volumes are growing, where data processing is moving to the edge of the network, and where AI is penetrating more and more real-world applications. So with the CHIPS Act, basically talking about the instruments we want to deploy in Europe and how we achieve better coordination. With the CHIPS Act, it's, as you all know, probably at this stage, we've structured it around 3 pillars. And to a certain extent, there are links, of course, between the three pillars of the CHIPS Act. The first pillar sets up the CHIPS, what we call the Chips for Europe initiative. And the idea here is to support large-scale capacity building, as well as innovation across the Union. And the idea, what we want to do here is to reinforce existing strengths, which I've mentioned, and also strengthen capabilities in next generation technologies. The first pillar also sets up a CHIPS fund, which is a first as well, to facilitate access to debt financing and equity. And that's set up in particular with smaller companies in mind. Anybody can avail of it, of course. And we know that hardware compared with software companies generally find it more difficult to secure such financing. So that's the first pillar in a nutshell. The second pillar then sets a framework to facilitate the implementation of projects that would contribute to security of supply and that strengthen the resilience of the ecosystem in the Union. It introduces a concept called first-of-a-kind semiconductor production facilities, with two types of facilities, integrated production facilities and open EU foundries. In order to qualify for this first-of-a-kind label, certain criteria have been established and have to be met, and these are set out in the regulation. There are also benefits to the label, like fast tracking of applications, especially where it concerns permits. And there are also obligations in relation also to Pillar 3. But that's just a snapshot. It's not the complete, description. The third pillar then, under the third pillar, what we do is we ask member states to monitor the value chain based on indicators which would be established. And any member state can then alert the Commission if they become aware of a potential crisis. The Commission would then convene the European Semiconductor Board, which is made up of member states. And if there is clear evidence provided that there is a disruption that would impact economically important or critical sectors, then a crisis mechanism would be triggered and an emergency toolbox activated. Again, I'm not going into big details. So those are that is basically a snapshot of the three pillars of the CHIPS Act. In the preceding...
Colette, if you can wind up in the next 30 seconds, that'd be terrific, because we have Eva back on. Thank you.
2 more points, just very quickly.
Thank you, Colette.
So we have also set up an industrial alliance on semiconductor technologies to advance Europe's needs in terms of competitiveness, and also help us identify bottlenecks and gaps and establish roadmaps to address those. And that will have an advisory role vis-a-vis the European Semiconductor Board. And finally, I would want to mention there is an important project of common European interest under preparation. It has been pre-notified and very encouraging in terms of number of participant countries and companies, and a good sign that stakeholders are coordinating among themselves to gear up for future challenges. So that's what I wanted to say as introduction.
Rudely interrupting you, but we had to move on, and thank you for that. I'm reassured, I hope. Just as the screens go blank.
Mach mich mal auf. Can you hear me?
No, wait, Lars, I'm waiting. Before you go on, Lars, forgive me. I'm told by my colleagues that Eva is back with us. Is that correct? Well, Eva, Can you hear me, Eva?
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, we had a loss of connection in the parliament.
Okay, well, if you're ready to go, then you are now about to be given the floor. And thank you again, Eva, for being with us, and over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, because it's a very timely event and discussion, and it's very important to have a high-level exchange of views before we proceed with the. I understand that during this phase of multiple crises, we are realizing our shortcomings, and maybe it's the last opportunity we have until we succeed to improve in order to achieve this resilience that we need. And when we talk about strategic autonomy, I'd say that basically what we want to do is to strengthen Europe's position in semiconductor ecosystem to make it more resilient. Autonomy is very difficult. It's a complex system, and with the interconnectivity that has been achieved among several countries in order to be able to have like one device in our hands of with the use of multiple chips and different technologies. So the complexity, the dependencies, and also the investments that they characterize the semiconductor supply chain to achieve the self-sufficiency is an effort that we have to start together with our allies in the US. The investment is planning to mobilize 43 billion of public and private investments. I have to say that this is the second time actually that Europe is trying to achieve that. Back in 2013, we had the same ambition. We didn't manage. The circumstances now are calling for us to try again. And I hope that investing in cutting-edge technologies and to trying to achieve a better, let's say, placing in the market could give the leverage that Europe should have and could have. So at this point, we need to have a better understanding of the mistakes we did, but we are strong in specific areas in the research, as we all know, and this will continue to be the case. In the chip manufacturing equipment, we do have this possibility in the European area in silicon wafers, mirror-like material that are essential for the semiconductors, and also chips for automotive and industrial equipment. But we saw with the pandemic, the very fast return to a new normal, we saw the shortage in the chips, and we realized that we have 10% of the global production in the end, and we need to double that. And of course, with the geopolitical shifts that we have, we really need to ensure that we will become stronger players. So now the European Chips Act should result in additional public and private investments. There will be more than 15 billion of that, at least, with existing programs, and in total to mobilize, as I said, 43 billion of policy-driven investments, at least. We heard that several companies, they already have higher targets, and we hope that we will manage also to build European startups in this direction. The proposal, since it just arrived at the European Parliament, and I cannot predict exactly the outcome, like how much it will change. At this point, it proposes to invest, as I said, in the next generation technology, to design tools and pilot lines for prototyping, to test and experiment the cutting-edge chips, and also to have a certification fast procedure for energy efficient and trusted chips, more investor-friendly framework. This also will not be easy, because I see just a few countries, like 6 or 7, are ready to engage a lot, but we need to have a more harmonized environment to get like better our targets. To support, as I said, the startups, the scale-ups and the SMEs, and also to ensure that we will retain talent here, and we will manage to reskill the existing force we have, also in microelectronics, and of course, tools of better foresight intelligence in order to predict where the next crisis might hit us. Let me say again that this is very geopolitical as a file. I think our understanding and maturity with this crisis, they reach the level where we can, and we know we don't have an alternative plan to succeed, so we cannot go back in 2013. Europe has decided to act in a collective manner, so we're going to be joining forces, and we will have the funding. And this is again a necessity to ensure that we are safe in several sectors. But in the end, because we haven't managed to achieve this precautionary principle, we haven't managed to have a preparedness plan. I believe we need to invest also in that. We have to understand how things are changing and to ensure that we will never be left in this condition where we feel unsafe in this production. If you want to invest, for example, in some chips, it could take you from 1 year to gain expertise up to 7 years for more intelligent technologies. And this means we might have to wait a lot for our new cars to have a touchscreen or mobile devices to have the same facilities or the same services that we're used to. So I believe it's very ambitious. I believe we are mature. It's very geopolitical, but the will is to proceed fast, and the Parliament is here to do its job and to contribute into including everybody, and also to include more new companies in this field. That's really, I would say, an emerging necessity. Thank you. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion, so I don't want to take more of your time at this point.
Thank you very much, Eva. I have a number of questions for you, as I have for Colette, but I will bide my time. And before I pass over to hopefully Lars, because I think just a moment he's due to go on. Finally, he's disappeared, but we'll see. Let me remind the audience here, the physical audience, okay, that there'll be a chance to ask questions when everybody's made their opening remarks. We didn't have any time, obviously, in the opening session. For those of you watching online, please use the Slido function, and the iPad that has been lent to me, I will use to access the questions put online via Slido. Lars, I'm told, has temporarily left us, just as he had his moment in the sun to join us. Hopefully he'll be back, which means, Ilias, you're on earlier than planned maybe, but please give us your opening remarks. Ilias.
Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be with everyone here today in the physical conference for a change, or partly at least. Eva very accurately said that a lot of this is also geopolitical. It is, but I work for industry, so I would like to take it down a bit more on the economics, if you like, and on the practical aspects that we see when we're reflecting on this proposal. So first of all, is this a welcomed initiative that the European Commission is pursuing? Absolutely. We have learned from the pandemic and what's going on in our neighborhood. When I look at this from the point of view of what are we building for with the CHIPS Act? Are we trying to solve for current shortages, or are we trying to rebalance the challenges that have been identified in the supply chain? I think it goes without question that what we're really trying to do here is solve for the future. We're not going to have tomorrow a factory in Europe making more chips. We're not going to have, in a week, in a month, in a year time, the complete supply chain challenges resolved. So what we're really doing here is we're trying to solve for a problem down the line. So it's very important, therefore, to reflect on how we want the market to look like when that problem, when the capabilities that we want will have eventually emerged. So when I'm looking at the proposal on the more technical side, the objectives are easy to support. We are fabless as a semiconductor producer, but we have a large R&D presence here in Europe. We obviously are supportive of the R&D efforts and the R&D ideas that are inside the CHIPS Act. but it's important to have more clarity around the structures, around the funding, around the role of the joint undertaking, about how all of this is likely going to play out in practice. It's important also to have a stronger understanding on what kind of requirements might we as manufacturers find ourselves into if, for instance, certification, standardization policy kicks in and find ourselves with obligations against certain standards. Let's not forget that the chip manufacturing business is global. If someone is researching or manufacturing out of Europe, they want to be able to do that and sell to the world, not just in Europe. The mechanisms that the Commission is putting or is proposing to put in place with our international partners, with industry collaboration, around information sharing, are all very, very important. It'd be positive to see more industry collaboration with the Semiconductor Board. It'd be a step in the right direction to see closer engagement of industry in the different information sharing mechanisms that are being proposed. And it's very important not to limit this to attempted national champions or hopeful national champions. This needs to be something that is open in order to reach, let's say, the broader community. But perhaps the most potent point from my perspective when I'm considering the economics is the question, as I said, of environment whereby we see, for example, that for broadband and digital, we have a big push towards leading edge. On the other hand, for more traditional, let's say, technologies and chips implementations, and frankly, even in the industries that we've seen shortages in Europe, we've seen older technologies being, let's say, the key focus of the shortage. So it's not enough to build the capacity, because we'll end up building capacity and end up having empty factories in the end. What is more equally important is that we build the demand, especially when we see as well this fragmentation of the global market, this decoupling of the global market. So how do we make sure that we incentivize and we bridge the initiatives of the CHIPS Act with green, with broadband, which will, like that, also give us the capacity to distribute the capabilities that we're going to build, that are going to be built between leading edge and more traditional technologies. Perhaps the last remark is skills. But I feel the need to emphasize it because I have a cybersecurity background, and I don't see cybersecurity engineers walking around in the street, right? It's going to be even more challenging to find semiconductors engineers walking around in the streets, both to design the chips as well as to implement the leading edge solutions. So, interesting initiative, watching the space with great interest, committed to Europe, but let's also make sure that we've thought through all the steps and the end goal and how the market will look like to achieve what we want to achieve. We should not aim for a race to the bottom, neither in terms of our capacity, neither in terms of a bidding war on who's going to offer more, like the previous MEP mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilias. I'm informed that Lars is rebooting, so I'm going to move to Ricardo, because I don't think Ricardo, at least at the moment, needs any rebooting. Oh. So Ricardo, it's over to you, my friend.
Doesn't look like, at least, or I hope not to give this impression. It's great to be here today. Thanks. I want to echo some of the comments made by Ilias. It really feels good to be back in the middle of the tech community. So delighted to be here today. I can just reiterate also from Intel's side the fact that we are welcoming this proposal by the European Commission. The ambitions are there. There are certainly some clarifications that need to be done of some of the concepts, but this is the role of policymakers in the months to come. I have some remarks. We were given 5 minutes. I'll try to raise 4 or 5 points in this time. So the EU CHIPS Act can really be a catalyst for investments, and as you all know, Intel is planning to invest massively in Europe to rebalance the global supply chain. The merit of the CHIPS Act is that it acknowledges manufacturing, and so the increase in production as a priority for this continent. And so it also brings a sense of urgency of actions in this space. And other speakers already emphasized how and why this proposal is so timely. Because Europe has experienced a decades-long decline in manufacturing. We experienced, especially in the last 2 years, a surge in demand and consumption of electronic products that are using semiconductors. And last but not least, there's an increased dependency on Asia. So this sense of urgency, I think, is also well reflected in the acknowledgement of manufacturing as a public interest, and so the idea of having also fast tracks for large investments. This is something we need to praise the Commission of the Commission for. The other point that I wanted to raise is about the right focus. It's not just the right focus on the 3 pillars that are certainly the areas where we all need to work together on, but there's a great emphasis on innovation throughout the proposal, throughout the different pieces of legislation that compose this package of measures. And so this emphasis of innovation is not just on the first-of-a-kind concept or in the commitment to next generation. These are very important points because they all lead to what the EU CHIPS Act should really create, so a cycle of innovation for Europe. And this focus on especially on leading-edge technology is what really can trigger those skills and those talent and that talent that Europe needs to be able to have a solid ecosystem going forward. Stressing leading edge, it was mentioned already by Elias. Leading edge is important because Europe wants to be at the center of the development of some applications like AI, 5G, autonomous driving, edge computing. And for these type of applications, we need leading edge semiconductors. So it's not just a matter of, and here I reiterate a concept that was raised by Elias. It's not just a matter of addressing the current chip shortages, but it's about looking at the long-term competitiveness of the continent. And speaking about a long-term scenario, a long-term perspective, I think this is also a long-term game in the sense that policymakers do need to think about opportunities and policy tools to attract investments now, but to keep those investments viable, sustainable, not just until 2030, because we have some ambitious objectives to achieve, but when we are investing and building large semiconductor facilities, first-of-a-kind facilities in Europe, these facilities will remain and will be part of the industrial fabric of Europe for the next decades. And so it's really important to make sure that for this long-term game, there are also policy tools that sustain, that make those large investments viable in the long term. And the last point that I wanted to raise is collaboration. Collaboration not only across industry, and I think it's urgent now to start working with the Semiconductor Alliance. It's probably time also to think how to include industry in a more structured way in the semiconductor board. But others have already mentioned the opportunity to work closely with like-minded partners. Both the EU and the US have taken remedial actions, right? The EU of declining manufacturing and the surge in demand of semiconductors. And so EU and US face similar challenges. And so it's where probably the TTC can be really a platform for this debate. I think Eva already mentioned this, and probably other Lucy and other speakers before, where semiconductors can really be the test bed for renewed transatlantic relations. So with these initial remarks, I look forward to the discussions, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I'd like to go back to you, Eva, if I may. In your opening remarks, you said that you reminded us we've been there before in 2013 with this industrial strategy, and which wasn't a huge success. I think everybody agrees. And you say on the current CHIPS Act proposal, none of us can predict the outcome, but we already know, as you said, it's a very geopolitical file. Do you think there are lessons have been learned from the experience of the 2013 strategy, which wasn't the success it was hoped to be, to inform how this new CHIPS Act proposal can be more successful and frankly be more adopted in a more timely manner as well, Eva?
Yeah, actually, that's a question that I had to ask to the Commission, and I didn't receive actually an answer. And I think the reason is that we were not after these several severe crises that we are now facing, realizing that they are not really a crisis that we can face alone on our own capacity, like in each member state. There are crises that they go beyond our borders, and we have as Europeans to have a common approach. So this is a level of maturity that we reached now. So I hope this will change things. Then we have the RRF. We have decided to develop the instrument of the Juncker Plan, the EFSI to the InvestEU, and now to the Next Generation EU. And InvestEU is still running. So we have been managing to understand how we can support private-public investments in a more efficient manner. Then, of course, the dependencies we have on digitalization and all these new technologies and services and possibilities we have, they are growing exponentially. So the demand now is its highest, I would say, level. And of course that we faced a real reason to be more ambitious. So back in 2013, we didn't have the same world shortage. We have higher prices. We have lengthier delivery for consumer electronics and life-saving equipment. We have car production decreased by 1/3 in some EU countries, or you get your car, but then you have to take it back after some months till the components that are missing will be delivered. So we didn't face the same circumstances, and I believe now we are determined to make it work. We have better technologies. I agree with Elias. He's always to the point and very experienced because he has worked also beyond the European Union's need for talent and skills, and he understands how competitive is the market, the global market. We need to retain talent in Europe, and he talked about cybersecurity. All students of the universities that I know of, that they have lessons of computer science, they are hired before they even get their degree. They have an offer, and usually several offers to start with. So this means we don't have the possibility to respond to the increased demand of talent. So I think I saw Spain planning, having this foresight plan, and they said, I'm going to focus on green jobs. I'm going to reskill my workers. I'm going to ensure they understand the new technologies, and I'm going to prepare the next generation for the new challenges. I think this is what we have to achieve in Europe, and this is a big part of this puzzle to achieve our resilience.
Thank you, Eva. We're starting to get questions from the floor, which is always very reassuring. But I'd like to ask Colette, if I may, Colette, if you can hear me. you've probably heard, and you can obviously give your reaction, that the CHIPS Act, despite its good intention, has been welcomed by Elias and Ricardo and many others, is underfunded and therefore is underpowered. And there's certainly a lack of clarity in some quarters about where the money is coming from. And I don't think you heard the opening intervention by the main rapporteur in the Parliament, Dan, earlier on, but clearly there's going to be a discussion, a heated discussion between you, the Commission, and Eva and her colleagues in the European Parliament on the level of funding and how it's spent. Do you have any sympathy for that, or could you clarify it, or do you think that, as it is, the CHIPS Act is adequately funded for the declared intentions it's trying to, objectives it's trying to achieve?
Okay, thanks for the question. In terms of being underfunding, I think we need to look at the goals of the CHIPS Act. So it is true that in terms of brand new money coming on the table, that we have something which I think is 2.875 billion is the exact figure which the Commission is putting on the table, and that would then we expect then member states to match that money, and this is for the Chips for Europe initiative solely, and industry then to pay its part, so to speak. I'll leave that open for the moment, but the question is whether it is the role of the European Union at the end of the day to be putting the money on the table. We do certainly put a lot. We do see the issue of needing to boost the ecosystem, not just production, as I said, but in order to justify, setting up production facilities, we do need to improve the situation in design in Europe. And that's one of the center parts of what we are doing under the Chips for Europe initiative. And that's where we are putting our money together with member states. Now, when it comes to fabrication facilities, what we are doing there is not necessarily, as I said, putting money on the table, but creating a more investment-friendly framework. So I think we put a lot of emphasis on money, and I mean we generally, but I think part of what we need really is a holistic view. We need to have many different types of instruments, I think, that we can use. Going back to the story about 2013, if you look at I think there were two issues there, one of which Eva has already mentioned. There was not such awareness at global level and we of the importance of semiconductor technology, and we haven't been hit by a shortage such as this that has really opened everybody's eyes. But the second dimension that I would emphasize is that putting money on the table didn't solve, whether it was too much or too little, it didn't do very much. You need a broad array of policies. You can look at the United States, for example, to see they have a very broad approach in their semiconductor policies, including when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. I think they including export control. Issues such as these, whereas it's the skills also is really important. I think the important point is to have an array of different policy instruments, not just money.
Thank you. No, thank you. We were good to remind you, and we're focusing big time on skills in the next panel, by the way. The gentleman there has been very patient with the microphone in his hand. Before I give you the floor, sir, just to remind you, the rest of you in the room here with us, now's your moment, now or never, to ask questions. And those of you watching online, If you're using the Slido function, I have this lovely iPad to capture your comments and your questions. If you would give your name, sir, and your organization, and then your question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Hendrik Apma. I'm Director General of the European Semiconductor Industry Association here based in Brussels. ESAA, shortly. ESAA represents the interest of semiconductor companies present in Europe. These companies include companies like NXP, for example, Robert Bosch, Infineon, or ST Microelectronics, responsible for big parts of European output. I would like to make a couple of remarks touched upon by several speakers. I will follow the pillar structure to make it easy. Indeed, pillar one, R&D. R&D in Europe is a success. I think all companies, semiconductor companies, enjoy very much the joint undertaking we have in Europe. And we also are very happy with the design of pillar one. And also, by the way, the general concept of the CHIPS Act. So pillar one, indeed, the intention of the CHIPS Act is also to go from the lab to the fab. So if we look at the experience so far, Europe was very good in R&D, but what didn't happen so much is the build-up of capacities in Europe. If you look at the initiative from Nelly Kroes in 2013, I believe, the Airbus of chips, I think it's also mentioned in the Commission documents, it didn't work out so well for Europe because there was a lack of incentives actually to build up capacity in Europe. What we had in Europe is the IPCEI, relatively very limited in the amount of money, I believe 1.7 or 1.9 billion for 30 companies. Whereas we see in the other regions, and we in this ESAA know this very well because we also play a role in the World Semiconductor Council, where our partners from the US, from Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan all participate. Altogether, they represent 95% of worldwide capacity. So these are the places where it's happening for the semiconductor industry. And in those regions, you see much more generous packages, to be frank. I think in China, we talk about 160 billion, which has gone to the semiconductor industry. China is building up massive capacities, which would worry Europe, by the way, as well. Massive capacities for semiconductors. In the US, we also see the situation. We have the US CHIPS Act, but beyond the US CHIPS Act, we also have a state level generous incentives for companies investing in the US. Japan, the same. Korea, I don't need to mention. Korea, by the way, has an incentive package of 50-60 billion. Korea, together with industry, are going to invest 450 billion in its industry. So think about these numbers and then think about the CHIPS Act. So I think it's clear that if we want to build up real capacities in Europe, we need to have an investment plan also for Europe. And Pillar 2 offers this possibility for the first time really for Europe. And this is why we welcome this. We also like Pillar 2 because it's relatively broad in its concept. It doesn't only focus on 2 nanometer, but it also gives the possibilities to invest in other leading edge. Leading edge is not only 2 nanometer, it goes beyond that. There are various technologies where Europe is, by the way, also very, very strong, and where the actual demand is. If you look at the car industry, they are not looking for the small nodes. The leading edge for the car is going from maybe 28 lower to maybe 12 in the future. So I think we also need to have an objective and a real and a market view about, what does Europe need for its ecosystem. We should also not forget, we talked about disruption in the semiconductor industry. The crisis was also partly by one famous, the car manufacturers industry was also self-invoked. What I mean with that is that there were canceling of orders when the crisis started. The car industry expected not to sell cars, so they canceled their orders and the capacities for chips. So this also means that we wonder actually if pillar 3, and this is a more critical element for the European industry, if pillar 3 is proportionate. First of all, the crisis we would probably not have solved even with the pillar 3 measures for the cars. I know I'm talking for a long time.
You are, I'm afraid you are, but you need to wind up, sir.
Stop now. So
next time we'll have you on the panel. That's a hint. I know we got the message. You'll be on the panel next time.
I would much appreciate that. So let me say maybe one more phrase, and that is really my last phrase. So we think that the priority orders, for example, also when you look in the wide amount of chips we have, what a car has maybe 1,000 chips. Are we going to priority order all those chips? Will this be possible? Will this be implementable? Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before as always, lots of questions for my fellow panelists. But before I do that, ask the next question from my side. Anybody in the room wants to ask a question? You say, I'm sorry, it's difficult to see with these lights in one's eyes. We go for it. Yes, please. And again, as usual, name, organization.
Yes, thank you. I try to just build on it with a very short question. My name is Martin Pioch. I work for ZVI. So I represent the German electro and digital industry. So we have the German microelectronics ecosystem as well as downstream industry. And a little bit building on what Henrik just said, maybe to the panelists, also to the company representatives. We know that Pillar 3 introduced a toolbox for the governments to act, but what can we do to not reach this point as industry? How can we increase upstream, downstream cooperation? How can we increase that this doesn't come to the point as industry players between the manufacturers and the downstream industries to avoid this type of Pillar 3 toolbox to be necessary to be used? Thank you very much.
Avoid the need to use the toolbox in Pillar 3?
I think it would be much more necessary to have much more commitment across the industry. In Germany, we do this. In Germany, we have roundtables. We bring together machine builders, the digital sectors, the automotive sectors, the semiconductor industry, and we think about how to make the supply chain more resilient. Especially the automotive industry in Germany came up with 10 points together with consultancy to think about inventory, to think about stockpiling, to think about more commitment along the value chain. Would be very helpful, so it doesn't have to come to the crisis.
I don't know if Elias or Ricardo, you want to respond to that. I mean, I don't understand. Is the toolbox there as a kind of safety net, a kind of insurance policy, or is it quite an integral part of the whole proposal, gentlemen?
So I view the toolbox as things have gone really bad, and this is the moment where, if you like, the government intervenes. But the Commission is here. That I see Colette nodding. So
okay,
but,
well, I'll give the floor to Colette in a second.
Or not. But to the question that the gentleman from the German industry raised, it's a valid question. Wearing my lawyery hat, if you like, I need to be careful. Why? As you know, semiconductor industry has long cycles. So you order now, and orders get fulfilled, 6 months from now, 10 months from now. So how you manage this information sharing, if you like, that is pretty competitive and at the same time does not disclose trade secrets, does not create situations whereby digi-competition would have questions. That is where, again, it'd be lovely to see something in the CHIPS Act if that would sort of like give some clarity, but this is where it really becomes very, very tricky. I don't think that any of the manufacturers wants to upset their customers, okay, by not delivering. It doesn't sound like a sound business strategy. So I think really the goal here is we need to anticipate, we need to predict, we need to be able to exchange information, but the regulators are putting limits around that. Hopefully we've learned something from all of this, and maybe we can revisit some of that. Some will readjust according to the situation. But really, this is at the hands of the Commission.
Yeah.
Ricardo?
Before I turn, I will give you the floor, Colette, in a second, but just ask, Ricardo, do you want to respond?
Yeah, a few additional comments. Thanks, Martin, for the great question. I concluded my initial remarks with collaboration across industry. Now, the existence of an emergency toolbox or a proposal for an emergency toolbox reflects the fact that we are in a situation that requires urgent actions. Now, if these actions are implemented in a very fragmented way across member states, if this emergency toolbox is not practical because the measures included cannot be carried out by industry because these measures do not reflect practices that are market driven. They do not reflect some of the existing best practices and do not actually serve both upstream and downstream industry. Then in that case we need to reflect about the fact of having or not having an emergency toolbox. But if industry is involved from the outset and we manage to identify some actions that would be beneficial for member states, for industry, then we can discuss about this in a more positive way, I would say.
And Colette, do you have a relatively quick response to the use of the toolbox or the non-use of the toolbox from Martin? For Martin?
Yes, I can be quick on that. So first, I think you've got it right in the sense that the toolbox is only deployed in really crisis situations, and there has to be the member states are involved throughout the process. But this question of asking information from companies, the idea really is first of all that the member states monitor and agree on indicators, which there's nothing to stop them, getting advice from industry, doing that in concert with industry. So that I think is the main part of Pillar 3, that we do monitor the industry more, or the situation, I would say, more closely than before, based on indicators to be defined. And yeah, as I said, the toolbox is really just for critical situations. The comments on the sensitivity of the information, I believe the US government has also really recently launched a survey with 130 respondents. And if they didn't get the details that they had requested, the government had also said they would use this, what is it called, the DPA, Defense Procurement Act, to get more information out of companies. So we're doing this, as I said, only in crisis situations, and we hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, extreme situation. If there are no more questions from the audience, I have one last question to all three of you, and let's try and focus on can be upbeat, forward-looking, positive, constructive. You've hinted, both you gentlemen on the stage, about the need for, or the desirability for private sector involvement, industry involvement, obviously, and other stakeholders by extension. And I think you, Ricardo, mentioned specifically the Trade and Technology Council as one obvious vehicle through which to make that kind of input. I mean, it is a whole new thing, and they've mentioned. I'll give you the final word, Colette, by the way, but I asked the guys on the stage first. Since we're at the early stages, we've been listening to the Commission and the Parliament. What kind of advice what role would you, put it this way, what role would you see people like yourself playing in the ongoing, not just the final shape of the CHIPS Act, is also the institutional process, but thereafter its execution, its implementation, its management on a long-term basis? Ilias, then Ricardo, and I'll give Colette the final word. Ilias. I think it's fair to say that we would like to be one of the trusted interlocutors. Right.
That's perhaps the nicest way of summarizing it. There are many industry stakeholders. Each one of us have their own, let's say, corner and their own role to take into account in the ecosystem. Some are bigger, some are smaller. But in the end goal here would be to participate in the shaping and help the smooth running and administration once, let's say, that's on cruise speed. Okay, thank you. Ricardo, briefly, your comment.
Well, I think that our role, again, is to support policymakers, stand ready to to provide advice throughout the lawmaking process, because we are talking about technologies that are extremely complex, and so we need to bring also some technical expertise and knowledge in the discussion. At the end of the day, it is really important for both the European Commission, the EU institutions, industry, and the entire ecosystem for this CHIPS Act to be extremely successful, because here we are playing a game for the competitiveness of the entire continent going forward. So it's extremely important for us, for our suppliers, for our customers, for the entire industry, for universities, and for the next generation. So hopefully Europe will also find a way not just to develop the next generation chips, but we'll find also a way to develop next generation technologies and the next generation engineers that will develop those technologies. So with this,
Okay, thanks, Ricardo.
Let's try to conclude with a positive note.
Absolutely, very welcome, positive note. And Colette, you have the final word, Colette.
On the success, I'm sorry, I lose the sound from time to time. So
it was about the involvement of the private sector, obviously industry, but other stakeholders in the not just the classic lobbying now as it goes through the legislative procedures of the proposal, but thereafter it's to maintain its ongoing success and building on its success.
Yeah, I think honestly, there's plenty of roles for industry. Even looking at the various pillars, pillar one, it's wide open. Our programs are wide open. Any industry can join, for example, the JU, which is the main host of the Chips for Europe initiative. We have the Industrial Alliance as well. I think by and large, yes, we are open to participation of industry and to active participation of industry and to listen to industry.
Perfect. That's a very positive note to end on. Thank you very much, Colette. Thank you to Elias and Ricardo. Thank you to my other panelists. Unfortunately, we lost Lars definitively. Apparently tech problems his end, I've been asked to point out, not our end, from technology point of view, and Eva as well. Thank you in the audience. You've been very patient with the kind of rearranging of the speaker's order and all that kind of stuff. Thank you for your indulgence with us. But thank you again to my panel, and we have a slightly shortened coffee break. We'll be back hopefully around 4 o'clock in this very room. Thank you again.
Thank you.